Hey everybody, Professor Gould here. We're going to start talking about the appendicular muscles, which of course are the muscles that move the arms and the legs. We're going to start up at the top with the muscles that move the scapula. You know, there's a lot of movement you can get out of the scapula, so there's a bunch of muscles. So let's go ahead and, let's move on. All right, let's break them down into a little more manageable pieces. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is protraction of the shoulders. This is bringing the scapulae forward. And this is what we do when we're slumped at our computer or over our phone or our textbooks or whatever. A lot of times, a lot of people over protract their shoulders. And so what you're doing is you're actually over contracting these two muscles, the pectoralis major and the serratus anterior. So this is the anterior chest, superficial on this side, deep on this side. And you can see the pectoralis major, which is probably the muscle you've heard of before. It entirely covers the pectoralis minor. Pectoralis minor is just this little fan-shaped muscle that connects the ribs 3 through 5 with the coracoid process. You remember that's that process that comes out of the anterior side of the scapula. So that's going to bring the top of the scapula toward the rib cage on the front. And the other muscle that is really important in protracting the scapula is the serratus anterior. The serratus anterior protracts the scapula, but does it a slightly different way. It wraps around the side of the body like this, originates on ribs 1 through 8, and then it inserts on the anterior medial border of the scapula. For those of you thinking, don't you mean lateral border? I had to actually double check because I didn't believe myself. So this is the part of the serratus anterior that we can usually see superficially. But here we go. The serratus anterior wraps all the way around, and here's the outline of the scapula. Okay, it goes all the way to the medial border. Inserts on the front of the medial border of the scapula. So it actually brings the scapula around from the back toward the front of your body. So you can see a little bit of the serratus anterior there and here. Okay, and you can see it kind of makes a fan shape as it goes behind the scapula and inserts on that medial border. All right, now, retractors are the ones that, oh gosh, none of us work enough. These are the ones you use when you stand up tall. And we have 3 muscles involved in this, part of the trapezius, because it's trapezius does everything, and the rhomboid major and minor. So the trapezius, we've already talked about it when we were talking about the axial muscles. And for those of you who are like, is it axial or appendicular? It's both. Because it can bend the neck, it can extend the neck, but it can also move the scapula because of this big origin all the way down the spinous processes to T12. And then its insertion on the spine of the scapula and then around to the clavicle in the front. So depending on the fibers that are used, you can change the movement that you get from the trapezius. So the superior fibers, these that insert on the scapula, are going to elevate the scapula and also superiorly rotate the scapula. So if you think of the scapula sitting on behind your shoulder like that, it can actually rotate this way and that way. So when you superiorly rotate the scapula, you do that. You actually turn it so that the glenoid cavity, imagine that's the glenoid cavity there, the glenoid cavity is facing superiorly. Okay, so that's superior rotation. The middle fibers, especially here, are the ones that we use to retract the scapula. And then if you've heard bring your shoulders back and down, you're using those inferior fibers to pull down on the spine of the scapula. Get your shoulders back and down. Okay, now the other muscles are the rhomboid major and the rhomboid minor. And what's important to remember is we have a lot of muscles in here and it's hard to keep them straight sometimes. So the rhomboid minor and major, first of all, cover up and completely block our view of the serratus posterior superior. And then there's another set of muscles that covers the foci in the scapula. Okay, we're going to come back to those. Those are rotator cuff muscles. For now, we're just going to talk about the rhomboids that connect the medial border of the scapula to the spine. So the origins are on the spinous processes from C7 to T5. I haven't broken them down individually. You can go look in your textbook for that. And then they insert, both muscles, insert on the medial border of the scapula. So when you contract these two rhomboids, oops, sorry about that, double there, what you're doing is you're pulling the scapula back toward the spine. So if you think about like trying to pull your shoulder blades so that they meet in the middle at your vertebral column, that's contracting your rhomboids. Now, if you do it in connection with the trapezius middle fibers, then you're just going to pull the scapula in toward each other. But notice that the fibers of the rhomboids are diagonal. So if you contract the muscles of those while using a different part of the trapezius, you can actually bring the bottom of the scapula up more than the top. So you can contract this part and bring the bottom of the scapula toward the midline and rotate the scapula, the whole scapula, inferiorly. Okay, so this is superior rotation, this is inferior rotation. So when you bring your arm like that, you are inferiorly rotating that scapula. Now, one other muscle, I said 3, I meant 4. The levator scapulae. This is a muscle that's going to elevate the scapula, and it also helps to inferiorly rotate it. Okay, so the name does what it says it is. It's the levator scapulae. It raises the scapula, but because it raises this medial side of the scapula, it can pull the top of the scapula up, and then the bottom, if it's pulled in this way, then the scapula rotates inferiorly. All right, now depressors. Depressors, again, we can use fibers of the trapezius. We can use fibers of the trapezius to elevate because the trapezius is really big. We also use the pectoralis minor, again, because it can pull down on the coracoid process. So if we use the pectoralis minor with the serratus anterior, then we pull the scapula forward. If we use the pectoralis minor with those inferior fibers on the trapezius, then we pull the whole scapula down. Okay, so it depends on what we're using together, which motion we get out of these muscles. Which motion the individual muscle can do depends on its origin and insertion, because of course you're always bringing the origin closer to the insertion when you contract the muscle. Sorry, insertion closer to the origin is what I meant to say. Okay, now, superior rotators turn the scapula on the body like that. We've got the superior fibers on the trapezius and the serratus anterior. And then the levator scapulae and the rhomboids can also do that superior rotation. Sorry, inferior rotation. I'm getting myself all kind of mixed up, aren't I? All right, and then there's one more muscle, which I put in this section, even though it doesn't move the scapula, but it does have a role in the stabilization of the pectoral girdle, and that's this little tiny muscle called the subclavius. And as its name suggests, it just sits under the clavicle. And this little tiny muscle that goes from rib number 1 to the bottom of the clavicle over here, and it just stabilizes the clavicle. Just helps it stay in place. So that's all it does. All right, so here's some of our muscle models. This is a medium muscle man that we met earlier when we were doing the axial muscles. This is mini muscle man, and I'm so sorry you can't see him. He's like 18 inches tall. He's just so proud to be mini muscle man. So here is on small muscle man, this side is superficial. This is superficial. This is deep, deep. So here's our trapezius, and then rhomboid minor, rhomboid major. Remember, minors sit on the shoulders of majors. Children sit on their parents' shoulders. So minors on top of majors. And then this is the pectoralis major. This is the pectoralis minor. There's the serratus anterior over here. Okay. And then back here, we can see the trapezius, and we can't see the rhomboids here. Okay. The other thing we can see here is right here, little tiny subclavius. Look, it's right there, right under the clavicle. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so in the next part, we're going to learn about actually moving the arm in the shoulder, and then we'll work our way down the arm.